Sten, we're live.
And a little Stevie Ray Vaughan, Pride and Joy, to lead us into another episode of In the Dugout. This is a Mike's with Mike's special version every Thursday on In the Dugout. Mike Collins, my co-host, will be joining us shortly, as always. And but let me give you a quick news flash first. Rhode Island is still in an oppressive lockdown. We're still being run by a single tyrant, and we still have a completely cowardly General Assembly who will not fulfill its own statutorily granted powers to intervene in so-called states of emergency. I mean, for how long does a state of emergency go on? And for how long? How long do we let people suffer, losing their businesses, losing their jobs, being quarantined from their loved ones, being forced to stay home, being at risk of being ratted on by their neighbors? For how long does this go on in a free society? For how long do we sit here and take it as free people? And if enough is enough, what do we do about it? Well, I can tell you that myself and some friends of mine and Coalition Party, we are working on something there. So stay tuned. But really, and as we're going to talk about later in today's show with our regular guest on Mike's with Mike's, Dr. Andrew Bostom. As long as we have this COVID state of emergency and these ridiculous rules and lockdowns, we'll have Dr. Bostom on to comment on it. What we're going to talk about today with him, he'll be joining us around 4:30 or so. We've mentioned it before, but when you understand the data that the state could be telling us about, but refuses to, and how that could have major impacts on not only personal freedom, but public policy and whether or not we need to have states of emergencies locked down, I think you might be as angry as we are right now. So that's coming up at the bottom of the show with Dr. Bostom. We'll take a look. I didn't really get a chance to follow today much with the governor's press conference, but we'll see if Mike or anyone else has any thoughts on that. Okay, as always, we do invite you to participate in the conversation. I want you to consider this a talk show, a talk video, instead of talk radio, make it talk video. And you can see that you can either go to that URL, rifreedom.org/call, or you can dial in if you're bashful and don't want to show your lovely face. You can just dial in, and at that number, just like you would dial into a talk show. So please participate in the conversation. Another news flash, and this has to do with our shows earlier this week. You may have seen that on Tuesday we interviewed a state rep from Pennsylvania who were having very potentially significant hearings about election integrity in their state. Again, he's not sure there's much that can be done about it, but if there is something done about it, it's huge news. Yesterday, we talked to former Board of Elections board member Steve Erickson. A lot of policies and judgments he and I disagree with, but he gave us some interesting facts and things to think about yesterday. Again, he's one of those guys with his head in the sand who doesn't think there's any fraud anywhere. That whole system's got it covered nationally and locally. Of course, not too many of us believe that, but still, there are more safeguards in place, and there's more explanations for things than even I had imagined. But newsflash, as again, fake news. There is no Joe Biden is not president-elect. Joe Biden is the presumed president-elect. But yet everybody wants to treat him as president-elect. Until the Electoral College votes to have him officially become president-elect, he is not. There are still contested ballots. Still contested states. Even if states certify, that's not the end of the game. In fact, if you listen to many out there, the fact that once certification gets passed actually makes it easier to start contesting, because now you have actually something to contest. Before the state certified it, you were just presuming there would be a certification. Once there's it can still be contested. It could still become uncertified. Again, I'm not saying it's likely, but again, it's possible. And there are hearings going on today in Georgia and Nevada, I believe. We saw Michigan and Arizona yesterday. We saw Pennsylvania last week. There are still open paths, unlikely as they may be. There are still unlikely paths. But yet this media and most in the national media refuse to tell you about it because they don't want you to know about it. They don't, because it makes them upset. Doesn't fit their narrative. You go to see the vitriol I have gotten, our center has gotten, just for publishing that interview with the Pennsylvania lawmaker on Tuesday. Even the media, Ted Nesi, very well respected guy in Rhode Island media, in a backhanded way, passive aggressive way, maybe I should say, criticized our Senate for doing the interview as if we were suggesting that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. We're not suggesting anything. But the real news is that these paths are open. It's possible, unlikely, maybe, but possible. And it is news. And we were simply doing journalism that this local media and most of the net refuses to do. It is news that there are still open paths for the Trump team. Whether they succeed or not, whether they're likely or not, it is new. There are actual hearings and actual state legislators with actual witnesses who have signed actual and real affidavits. It's all real, but yet the fake news media doesn't tell you about it. And then, worse than that, are just the leftists. I'm just going to say it, the leftist wackos. Oh my God, you should see some of the comments I get on emails, some of the comments I get on social media. I mean, people who completely, like the media, have not only have their heads in the sand, but then they come out with the most personal, insulting attacks they can think of. And I tell you, they're not very smart, so they don't think of anything that's too insulting. It's kind of funny. I see them and I just kind of laugh, like, these people are just morons. That's why we have a segment, Social Media Morons. In fact, I'm going to look into, I think I might have captured one of those. But it's why we have the Social Media Morons segment, because these people they think they're the smartest people in the room. They think because the media and the pop culture is on their side and because they're politically correct, that all they have to do is repeat a talking point that they know nothing about. And that makes them God, and that makes us idiots. And then when you challenge them to get specific or to give a principled reason to explain, all they can do is insult you back. It's just amazing how people don't want to accept reality. And as you know, I've always said, in this state and across the country, the progressive socialist left, literally, I mean, I don't understand how it works, but I think literally they live in a land of make-believe. They believe things. I mean, they say we're the science deniers. They believe things that cannot be true, logically, scientifically, and they ignore everything else that they want. They're in this bubble, this land of make-believe bubble. I mean, again, let's think about. All right, let's do this. The Brett Kavanaugh hysteria, the attacks from the left, right? The Russia collusion attacks on Trump for years, still ongoing. Pretty much. Hey, Mike Collins is here. I'm on a roll, Mike. I'm on a roll. All right, hold on. Let's get Mike into here. Mike, unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. I'm
all right, there he is. There's the co-host. There's the big man.
Oh, sorry I'm late. Jeez.
That's right. So your punishment is you're going to let me finish my thought I was in.
Go ahead.
So I was just talking about how the media and the left have their heads in the sands, and if it's not the reality that fits their agenda, they just completely ignore it. But on the other hand, if you look back, and we're talking about election integrity here, both nationally and locally. But Mike, think about what happened with Trump-Russia collusion with the Brett Kavanaugh that literally based either on nothing, literally nothing, no evidence, or one weak person's testimony in Brett Kavanaugh's case. Think of the hysteria and media attention those two issues got, yet with hundreds of affidavits, with hundreds of statistical pieces of evidence. Nobody says there's any evidence all to think that there was any election fraud going on in this country. Oh, we lost Mike. So Mike, we'll have Mike comment on that when he gets back. But I ask you to think about that. I wouldn't say it's proof yet, but there is certainly ample evidence to warrant further investigations into this election fraud. The evidence is there, but your left doesn't want to even look at it. But then when the tables were turned on no evidence, they turn the world upside down for months or years at a time. The integrity of our elections, and Mike, you and I we talked about this last week. For months we've been telling you what a fiasco was going to be with mass mail balloting, and we have a fiasco now.
No, we have a cluster F. Hey, listen, for 4 years, their fictitious agenda, and you're really going to look at, you're going to break it down into two different categories. The corruptness of the elitist of 30 years of sitting in a congressional seat when the Constitution clearly says you may serve this country. It doesn't say we're giving you a job for 30 years. With that being said, the audacity and the manipulation and of the media losing its unbiased nature and going strictly to one side. They're not reporting. All right. They have an agenda. And I don't care whether it's Facebook, Twitter, the Providence Journal, the Washington Post, they all have a very, very specific agenda. They're not up the middle anymore. They're hard to the left, and they want you to believe what the bull they're telling every day.
Of course. So here's the thing. So our show with Dr. Boston, we're going to talk about things today that nobody else is talking about. In fact, what we talked about with him last week is now becoming national news, and we're going to talk about that later. That's what the cycle threshold tests data. It's now a national news story on that. So why listen? You and I are citizens. We're not trained journalists, right? We've got some experience on the radio. We've got our center, but yet it's up to us. I mean, to do the only real journalism. Isn't that journalism, to investigate, to find out what's real and what's not? I mean, our show, In the Dugout, our show, Mike's with Mike, it's really the only media that's actually doing any real journalism, investigating, asking questions, being open-minded, rather than the stenographers out there who do nothing but write down and report on what the political class feeds them.
And yeah, and that's what's all part of been going on for the last 4 years, is that Listen, if you abide by our agenda and you do what we tell you to, then we'll give you these exclusives and you can push your bull crap to everybody in the country. And therefore, it'll help your papers, it'll help your circulation. And long as we silence everybody else where they contradict you, then it becomes believable. So
Well,
they become pathological liars.
But it's not, but that's my next. It's yes, you're right. So you've got this compliant media who does nothing but repeat what they're told. You've got I don't think it's a major factor for most news in Rhode Island, but it's certainly happening nationally at the major news level. But yes, we do have a big corporate media who are shutting people down and shutting speech down. But we also have we have a public who won't speak out.
Oh, absolutely. We got sheep.
Yeah, we got sheep.
Listen, I've been portraying that for years. I've been talking about that for years. That's a whole nother situation. People, listen, let's back up a couple of days. And I think you were hitting on this, and I'm running, like I said, a little late. I had a bad afternoon. All
right.
So we get a couple of guys, truck drivers, that come up and say they have 22 pallets of ballots coming out of New York going to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, a postal service truck driver.
Postal service truck driver, okay, contracted carrier to a postal service. Now, I don't think that guy got up in the morning and said, well, I'm going to sign an affidavit that could put me in jail for felony, so I'm going to therefore make up a great story that I had 22 pallets on the trailer. I don't think that was his intention or the other guys in the morning.
All right, Mike, can we trust truck drivers?
Yeah, for the most part. Well, the reason why, it's pretty interesting, and let me take that for 1 second.
Sure.
The uniqueness of a postal driver is when you bid those postal contracts, that guy basically ends up on a seniority list at the post office. And if you get rid of the contract or lose the contract, and somebody bids that contract and they hire that driver, they assume his seniority. And the reason why I'm saying this is those guys are pretty astute in regards to what's in the trailer. So when you bid a contract mail run, and a lot of people don't realize this, if that's bid for X amount of days a week, you could conceivably pull into the post office some night, and there could be nothing for you going to Philadelphia. Literally nothing on the trailer.
Yep.
But you still go to Philadelphia.
You still go.
You still go because
you might have to pick something up. Bring it back.
That's right. They're relying on you coming back. So a lot of times that happens. So do guys necessarily look? Yes, a lot of guys look to see what's in the trailer to anticipate, okay, I'm going to be in Bethpage or Philadelphia at least 2 hours because I got 22 skids coming off the truck. So guys can plan their time accordingly because they have an arrival time.
Right.
Now, to take it...
Right, it's all set on a schedule, right?
Well, yes, and to take it one step further, this is how we know this guy is not lying because he's timed. There's a time in and time out at every post office when he arrives. And when he questioned the supervisor about the magnitude of the load with the 22 pallets, it wasn't a normal load for this situation. He was told that basically it was none of his concern and just deliver the damn load, right? So all this is documented going down there. So
of course, just for those who don't know, we're referring to a guy who's come forward. He's like you said, he's a postal service contracted truck driver who in New York was given 22 pallets of mail ballots to bring them to Pennsylvania.
Which are already pre-filled out.
Well, yeah, pre-filled.
And predated.
And then, so there should never be any instance where ballots are crossing state lines. I mean, it cannot be legitimate. Now, did they all get counted? What was, I don't know if we've proven that yet, but still but there's no evidence, Mike, but there's no evidence of any fraud. There's no evidence, Mike.
So let's back up with what you're saying. So in a real world situation, let's say hypothetically, Philadelphia had, for some forsaken reason, 2 ballot counter machines go down. And there's this little town of Bethpage that's got the 2 of the brand new state of the art. They call around and say, we're going to be 2 days behind in our counting. Can you count our ballots for us? In a unique situation, they truck the ballots to Bethpage, right? Count them and then put them back on the truck and bring them back. But that's not what happened.
No, it's
These
not
ballots originated
right
from New
Bethpage
York,
and were
which means-
delivered to Pennsylvania
which means they were printed in
Yeah.
New York
and filled
That-
out in New York. Yeah.
and filled out. So they were pre-printed ballots.
You know, one of the crazy conspiracy, listen, I don't like to advance it, but I think it's just fun, right? I'm basically poo-pooing it while I'm telling it. But one of the crazy conspiracy theories I saw is that mafia people in New York were hired to create the ballots for whoever needed them wherever.
I don't I don't agree with that. Because most mafia guys like money. And most of them would be capitalists.
No, and they were paid huge sums for it,
Right. Yeah. Listen,
supposedly.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's pretty far out there, but I don't know. I mean, there's some
They-
crazy theories out
well,
there.
you hear, and the next there'll be Vinny the Forger. They broke him out of the federal pen. You
Any
know,
boom bots.
yeah, there'll be all sorts of stories behind this. But what my point was it comes down now, and here's the media attacking the credibility of these two innocent truck drivers because they come forward and try to do what they believe is their constitutional duty, all right, and their oath to the federal government, all right, and to themselves that they seen something that wasn't right.
Yep.
And now here's the media trying to dust it because it doesn't fit to their agenda.
All right, Larry, the Liberty guy here. I mean, must mean it's important. What do you got, Larry?
Question from Mike Collins. The truck driver said that his trailer wasn't there when he came back the next day. How could there be a break in the handoff of tickets? Wouldn't the trailer be easy to track?
Well, yeah. All right. So two different things. If the trailer does in fact have satellite tracking on it, which we do have satellite tracking on it because some of my customers require that, but they necessarily do not have to have satellite tracking. I do not believe it's a post office situation. Now, you guys got to understand, he's going to that post office wherever it was in Pennsylvania. That does not discount the fact that there's not a carrier that doesn't work out of that post office that does loads from that post office to other post office. So the deal could be in where they got the guy to move the trailer. Okay. Now, has the trailer ever surfaced? I don't know. It will surface, I'm sure. I don't think there's been an accusation that the trailer was stolen. Is that where this guy is? That the question, or just the
It was
curiosity?
destroyed for a lack of evidence, so no fingerprints could be found on it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's that's what I'm saying. So to lose a 53-foot box is a big loss. You know? But the point is, he goes back for the trailer because obviously he dropped his trailer. That's the only reason why he would drop his trailer. Which now the question remains is there's a twofold side to the story. Is he based out of Pennsylvania and use that load of mail for a backhaul going into Pennsylvania? Or is he based out of New York and dropped the trailer because it was going to be so long for him to get unloaded? Those are the next two questions that should be asked.
All right, so we'll see. Well, you said he was an innocent guy. You know, there's another innocent guy in our state, and I didn't catch the name, but you've probably all seen and heard the story. I want to get Mike's take on it. What about this guy at Max Fitness? He's got 2 places in Rhode Island.
My
refuses
hero.
to-
My hero.
Yep,
He gets the brass balls award. I give
Yep.
this guy credit. As a matter of fact, we should get a GoFundMe page to pay his fines.
Well, I want to at least get him on the show, and if he's got, I'm sure he's got a GoFundMe page, and we'll be happy to promote it. So if anyone out there, Mike, you've got great contacts anywhere. If anyone out there knows how to reach, I don't even know the guy's name. We reached the guy at Max Fitness Clubs.
So
Double
let me-
X and Max and clubs with the double Z at the end. We'd love to have him on our show.
So let me hit on that for a minute, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I have to commend the Lincoln Police. I really do go to give credit when credit is due. The Lincoln Police was sent to that facility. They looked right at him and said, do what you got to do because this isn't our concern. Your problems with the Department of Business Regulation. So the police didn't go in with Gestapo tactics of trying to shut this guy down. Okay. Another guy we must commend over the same thing today is Charlie Lombardi, mayor of North Providence. Same
Oh,
thing.
what did he do? I missed it. What did he say?
Another business in North Providence. The guy opened up. They sent the cops. Charlie Lombardi went down and said, do what you got to do. This isn't my problem. My problem's with your DBR. Okay. Same thing.
Well, apparently the Rhode Island Department of Business Regulations is preparing legal action, removal of licenses, whatever they got to do to shut these guys down.
On what? There's no law. On what?
Well, that's what they're planning to
What-
do. I guess.
What do you write the ticket for? Because there's no law broken. Is a gubernatorial action a law?
Executive order.
Is it a law?
It's not a constitutional one. Some claim it's a law, some claim it's not. That's going to be the legal fight.
Which we should
So
be
that's
getting
why we want this guy on. Come on our show. We'll promote your GoFundMe. I'm sure he's got a GoFundMe page. And we want, the guy is a hero. You know, we've seen people in New Jersey and other states
Yeah, well, you know what?
do the same. New York, yes, last night, if you watch the news.
They took him away in handcuffs. Good for him.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm glad. And he got right out. You know what? It's a shame because back to the sheeple here in Rhode Island. That's right. And I'm calling you all sheep because none of you got any nuts. So you know what? All of you get 200 or 300 of these together and all open up your businesses. All right. What are they going to do? Come around and find you all?
Yep.
Flood the courts. Who gives a shit? Screw these people. Open your business. Save your life. Save your families. I'm not saying endanger anybody's health. But you know what? With the statistics, and you're right. You know what? To back up 10 pages, Dr. Andy, the information he gave us last week, we were ahead of everybody else in the news.
That's right.
All right. Because he's so on top of this.
Because we're the only ones actually asking questions and,
Okay.
and wondering why. And,
And
he's going to be
explaining.
with us. He's going to be with us in just a few minutes, and we're going to continue that thought. So let me just get one more thing in for us to talk about before he hopefully joins us in a few minutes here. So it's little clubs like this, you know, Max Fitness clubs, you know, that make the economy go. And you wonder why Rhode Island's economy is struggling compared to the nation. But the nation, Mike, you know, even with major states shut down, it's unbelievable what's happening in the nation. I don't know what the Dow did today, but going over 30,000 a couple of days ago, you know, back in March, you know, everybody said, oh, with these lockdowns and this COVID crisis, you know, the economy is doomed. And sure, it did go down a lot. I think it went down $2,300 in one day.
No.
But what a comeback. What a comeback we're seeing.
Running-
and
it's
we got so
running-
much more room to go.
It's running on a fictitious market and a fictitious aspect that there's going to be another PPP round. Okay, that's what it's based on.
Or a vaccine.
The vaccine is coming. We all know that. But listen, these businesses.
Yeah, I'm sure it's inflated a bit.
These businesses are not going to survive unless they get a PPP hit. And the egregious actions of this governor holding back that money. So let's take this guy for the gym, for example. I was livid yesterday when I just happened to turn on one of the local talk shows and listen to that a-hole that runs in the afternoon. And our infamous schmuck, Tom from Newport, calls in and couldn't understand how this guy couldn't survive lasting without business for 2 weeks because he's done it several times in his business. Well, you know what, buddy? When daddy gives you the keys to the kingdom, it's very easy. This guy that owns that gym, him and his partner are on the hook for $1 million plus. All right, in those gyms, $1 million plus. Businesses survive, prosper on cash flow. On cash flow. When you take away the cash flow, you are dead in the water. Okay, and this is
Unless
what
you've got some amazing reserve somewhere. Yep. Most businesses don't have that.
Most businesses, Mike. You know, when at times it comes down to it with the tax basis and everything else like that, some of these businesses splitting here. I mean, 3 to 5% on the end. You know, big capital investment, but it's the aspect of being able to run your own business. So when you put this in perspective, to be able to sit back and, you know, your bank notes don't stop coming, your insurance doesn't stop coming, your taxes don't stop coming, and then have the audacity to say, well, I can't understand why no one could shut down for 2 weeks. You're on the crack pipe. All right. Either that or you're some silver spoon little bitch, excuse my language, that, you know.
Mike, you're in a mood today. You must have had a bad afternoon.
I blew a tire out coming down the highway, my right front tire. So, which was totally ignorance on my account because I was procrastinating getting new tires, and I deserved what I got. I'm not questioning about that. But I've been listening to this stuff, and I've been listening to the ignorance of going on the talk shows. The other ignorant thing I hear this morning is she going to Washington or is she not? So 30 seconds on that. Now, to our listeners that might listen to this now or might be listening to this tonight, let me explain the facts of life to you in the worlds of Gina Raimondo. Gina Raimondo was the first guy to jump on when Bloomberg ran for president. Bloomberg spent $1 billion on his presidential campaign and then quit. Bloomberg then dumped another $1 billion into the Democratic Party. And because Gina was Bloomberg's little first jump on, Bloomberg is owed a favor from the Democratic Party. So hence, Mr. Biden, you will do something with Governor Raimondo for my $1 billion. Okay? That's how I perceive things. Is she going? Damn straight she's going. Because this lady who put Rhode Island in her taillights. Okay?
Well, you know what, Mike? So she said, I am not going to be the HHS secretary. If you remember,
Yeah.
I don't know if it was on this show or a show, my In the Dugout show without you, but we reported from our sources that we hear that Gina is going to be Commerce Secretary.
Yeah.
So maybe she's truthful in saying, I'm not going to be HHS secretary.
She's very specific in what she's saying she's not going to be.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And you got to watch her wording because she's
Yes.
cute as a fox.
Yes.
Okay? And this is my point. So you think about the beauty of this. All right? She rides out of here on her broom, goes to Washington, and in return, leaves us hanging the bag, and she blames everything on COVID. Little McKee there comes from Cumberland and says, I was never briefed on anything, and plays Mickey the dope. But it's okay because my marijuana interests are fine. So we'll move on. So he moves up the ladder as governor. He plays
His marijuana interests?
Oh, we'll get into that too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's
We'll save that for another show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's as dirty as the rest of them. The grow centers and everything, he's partners in. He's not so squeaky clean too. Okay? You know, my mother raised ugly kids, not stupid ones, and I'm pretty streetwise, and I know what the hell's going on.
Wait a minute, Mike. Look at that
right.
dome. That's one of the best looking domes I've ever seen.
We could talk about contracts and to building contracts given away, $10 million no bid contracts, move the Board of Elections to a place on Plainfield Pike, you know, when they didn't need to move because they don't need to store vote machines anymore. So I could get into all that, but my point, Case, is she's out of here. Okay. She does not want to face the crap that's going to hit the fan. All right. She's ran us $250 million a year for 4 years in the hole. We're $1 billion in the hole. All right. That money's coming, expires by 12/31. Joe Biden doesn't get until 1/20. She's got no money to bail us out. She'll be out of here. She'll be in Washington.
All right. That's my call. All right. Andy, Dr. Boston, welcome to the show. Welcome
Hi,
back.
Doc. Good afternoon.
Hi, guys.
Now, listen, speaking of good looking, we're all good looking guys, but can I say one thing here though? Looking at Andy and looking at Mike and looking at all that glare coming off the top of your head, would you guys please wear a hat like me when you come on in the dugout?
I need some of that.
I mean, it's really
TV makeup.
It's really blinding me right now.
That's good.
The double stereo effect of the glare coming in.
I usually shave right before I come on. It could have been worse.
Well,
I'm being merciful to you.
Look, we're in the dugout, so you got to wear a cap. You know, when you come in the dugout with
All right, I can grab a
wear
cap. Can I grab a cap?
Yeah, go grab a cap.
All right.
So I'm like, that gives you an extra 15 seconds to talk about with Gina.
What I'm saying is, you know, here they are thinking she's not one guy. She's not going to go. She's going to go.
Nope.
She is. She is part of that Yale elite Wall Street group. She wants to ride this to further her career.
Yep.
And you know what? And then 4 years or so, she'll try to come
staying in
back.
Little Rhodey ain't gonna get it done, is it?
No, it's not. All right. And she'll try to come back and run for senator or congressman or whatever else like that. Okay.
Well, my sources still say Commerce Secretary, so we'll see if we're right.
But regardless, Mike, the sources are still saying she goes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All right. What do you got for a hat, Doc?
You see it?
Oh, is that the Northeastern Huskies?
No, actually, it's UConn.
Oh, Yukon Huskies. Okay. It's not Yukon's colors, is it? Red? They're not red.
I don't know, but this is what I was given as a
No,
gift.
that's a Northeastern Huskies. No, it's got to be Northeastern.
Hang on.
UConn's blue and white.
No, I think it was actually all right. Whatever. Yeah, it says UConn on the back.
Oh,
See?
okay. All right, Yukon.
All right.
Oh, they're blue. I think. Okay.
Yeah, usually.
All right, Doc. So you sent us some data, but before we get to that, from last week's show, I got a question from Susan, one of my good friends who watched our show. She sent 3 questions about vaccines. I hope you will address quickly first, okay?
Okay.
1, will you receive the COVID vaccine when it's available?
Me personally,
Yes.
I doubt it initially because I'm not in a high risk category.
Okay.
And I'm certainly not a priority. If I were clinically active, I don't have.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have any particular great concern about it.
Okay.
I just don't think-
Would you take it not because you didn't think it was safe?
No. I
Oh.
just don't. I don't think it's particularly unsafe.
Okay.
You know, I think it's a little. I think it is a little out there only because it's been developed so quickly, and it is.
Well,
a new
that's the
principle.
second question. Do you have any
Yeah.
concerns with the fast track of these vaccines compared to
Yeah.
other vaccines?
Yes, only because the mRNA idea is a new idea in terms of applying it to big populations. In principle, as I think I've explained before, I think it's actually a very safe principle because the mRNA itself is rapidly broken down. But you know, it's only been available through these two big clinical trials with essentially no more than 6 months of observation. So
All right.
that's very short.
Third
So,
question.
on the other hand, though, I think the way they're targeting it to people that are at high risk for infection or certainly high risk for fatal disease. So the elderly on the one
Okay,
hand,
yeah.
high risk for fatal disease, healthcare workers, or even if they're healthy, frontline workers dealing with people who have huge viral loads. That makes some sense to me.
All right. All right. Third question is kind of, you've alluded to that. You know, I mean, obviously without long-term study, you can't really know, or can you, what the long-term potential negative effects, chronic disease or anything like that down the road. If you get a vaccine, what would you say to people who might have concerns about that?
I think that what should guide them at this point is in terms of getting vaccinated is being at truly high risk. I think that's what should guide them.
Until it's mandated.
High risk exposures, and again, I'm not just talking about garden variety exposures going to Walmart. I'm talking about healthcare people, particularly EMTs, people working in ERs, people working in ICUs, where they could get exposed to huge boluses of virus. Those types of exposures, I think it's perfectly reasonable to be vaccinated, and of course the institutionalized elderly.
All right, we'll have more discussions on that because I'm sure it's going to be mandated for a lot of us, if not all of us, soon. Mike, what do you want to go with next?
No, because I was going to reiterate, because as Andy explained to us a couple weeks ago, when people concerned about the long-term health things, if you remember correctly, Andy did say this was a messenger vaccine. So it's not invasive to your DNA or anything else like that. And basically, it causes protein increase. So like he said, it's a rapid concept of jumping in on this, but it's not as invasive as a lot of like a measles vaccine or anything. Am I correct in saying that, Andy?
Well, it's not an attenuated vaccine. It's not where they're giving you a virus where people who are immunosuppressed, that's always a concern. It's not a principle where they're using another virus to deliver materials like an adenovirus-based vaccine. On the other hand, though, it's not a traditional old-fashioned every year flu type shot where you're basically given deactivated dead virus. That's what we have the most experience with going back decades now. And, I think the Chinese were working with that principle. I don't know how, if they're applying it yet, and who knows what goes on in that country. But I mean, that would have been the most comfortable if that had shown efficacy like this. That would have been the thing that people are most, have the most experience with.
I was reading in a lot of these other countries that are not going to get access immediately to the vaccines, that a lot of them been using the chloroquine with zinc.
Right. Hydroxychloroquine with zinc.
With zinc and having good results with it.
Well, they're using it for two reasons. They're using it as basically the way you would use. So if you're, there's a lot of exchanges between Rhode Island and the Dominican Republic. There's a big Dominican population in Rhode Island, and there's also medical exchanges. So if you were to go to the Dominican Republic now, it's an area where hydroxychloroquine sensitive malaria is endemic. And that's the recommended prophylaxis. So if you take that prophylaxis model and extend it to coronavirus, That's one use that people are in India. It's huge. They're prophylaxing. In lieu of a vaccine, they're prophylaxing healthcare workers, people who have high risk exposures with hydroxychloroquine. The trials that have looked at prophylaxis with just hydroxychloroquine alone, if you pool them together, there's a very modest benefit, about a 20% reduction. But that's better than nothing. It's something.
Yeah.
And the same thing with early treatment with hydroxychloroquine. It seems to reduce hospitalizations. In other words, so if you take a person that's high risk, is COVID positive, has a mild clinical syndrome, so like people that probably actually have it, and then you treat them at home. If you look at the pooled analyses, not individual studies, none of them individually have shown enough of an effect or statistically enough of an effect. But if you pool the data together, again, it looks about maybe a 20-25% benefit, which is very, very modest, but it's something. And if it's true, it could benefit the hospitals in terms of all these concerns that we have now about hospital capacities.
All right, Larry Liberty guy, what do you got for us?
We got a question from Al. What about taking a medication that lowers your immune system? I take Tremfya. Tremfya.
Honestly, I'm not familiar with what that is, but yeah, obviously it's always a concern with someone who's immunosuppressed. The patient population I'm most familiar with, because I worked with them for many years, are kidney transplant recipients. So they're on high dose immunosuppression. And they're at increased risk. So anyone that's immunosuppressed, whether it's through drugs or through cancer or through specific diseases that cause immunodeficiencies, they're going to be at potentially higher risk.
Thanks, Doc.
Thanks, Larry. All right. So we got a lot to cover with the doctor in the next 15, 20 minutes. So let's start with the data, Doc, that you sent us today that you'd like to review. So tell me which chart you want to see, but I brought this one up first.
Yeah, no, I did. Okay, so can you see it more clearly? Because I just want to make sure people can see it.
Yeah, people are seeing it fine on the other end. It's a little difficult for us sometimes.
Okay, good. So all I wanted to show is that if you look at the last 4 weeks, you see a big uptick in infections, positive tests, I should say,
infection rate, right? That's the infection rate, right?
Yeah, these are rates per week, the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th. These are weeks ending on those days in November. So you're covering the whole month. And you can see a big rise up to 6% from 3.7% for 2 weeks in a row, and a smaller rise at the end of the month. Now, does that mean that we're approaching some sort of a peak? All I can say is I hope so, because the lower the better. This is what I really wanted to focus on, guys, because there's the green is hospitalizations, and you can see a steady rise in hospitalizations. And maybe again, let's pray we may be reaching some sort of a peak up here at the end of the month, but that's plotted against 3 measures that I think are actually more important, and I'll explain why. That appear to be much more stable. And the first in the purple is the ICU admissions. And then below that is the number of the people in the hospital that are on ventilators. And then below that, so that's the yellow, ventilators. And below that in red are the deaths. And these 3 more indices of more severity of disease, they are much flatter. And they are disproportionate. If you want to show the next thing you had just flashed for a second, I wanted to give you an example comparing the end of April to the end of November. If you look at the number of hospitalizations first, high number of hospitalizations at the end of April, even
more than April.
Right, more now. And I want to explain potentially why that might be. But clearly the severity has gone down in the face of this. So if you look at, there were 23.5% of those patients that were in the hospital that in the state at the end of April that were in the ICU, and 16.1% that were ventilated, and 24 deaths over that 24-hour period. Compare that to a rate of ICU over total hospitalizations of less than half, 11%. Less than half that number, again, in terms of ventilated patients, 6.9 versus 16.1, and 5 deaths in a 24-hour period. So one of the things I've learned is that in October, 2 things happened. First of all, in hospitals, we have an observation area. And that observation area, I'll give you a classic scenario for that. Patient comes in with chest pain. It's a good story clinically. They're a high-risk person potentially for having a heart attack, but it turns out they rule out. They do all the laboratory studies, enzymatic studies, et cetera. They serially follow their electrocardiogram. And then even at the end of that 8-hour period, they'll literally put them, if they're convinced, they'll put them on a treadmill and monitor them and make sure that there's no change in their electrocardiogram, et cetera. And if they go through all that, they send them home. Those observations for COVID patients are now being counted as hospitalizations. So they're contributing. I don't know how much, but they're contributing to this. The other thing is that.
So you mean they might have COVID, but they're being observed for other reasons. That's
right, and they might be triaged and actually sent home. So the other thing that's happening is that remdesivir was approved for usage, for early usage, with patients that are mildly to moderately symptomatic, as opposed to just catastrophically symptomatic. And those patients started to come into the hospital for their course of remdesivir, which can be several days to a week. And that may be contributing to the burden, but something's got to explain the lack of relative severity where you're cutting the severe outcomes more than in half relative to the hospitalization rate. Is that in the end, for all these people, regardless though, if you've got more people in the hospital, we are requiring these spillover facilities, although I still think at this point the main purpose is convalescence. But it's certainly something to watch. But when you look at where we were in the spring versus now, I have to look at those data and still say we're in a better place now.
All right, so let's segue that into transparency.
Yes.
We've talked about this before. So first, let's start. The state is not telling us why people are in the hospital, right? Whether it's for they're really ill with COVID, whether they're under observation for something else, just happen to have COVID, or whether they're just in there for a simple treatment and they're going to go home. They're not telling us, right?
Exactly.
You've asked for that data, right?
Yeah, I asked for the data on what are called the ICD, the International Center for Disease Classification codes. So there's specific codes for admission, and all I wanted to see was how many are presenting with a severe respiratory illness, and what are the codes for that? Pneumonia, something called lower respiratory tract infection, bronchitis,
right? Whatever.
Worst of all, something called acute respiratory distress syndrome. Those patients always wind up in the ICU. What is the percentage of total admissions that fall under those categories? That's very important.
Yeah, it would be helpful to know. Was that at your request, or Judicial Watch help you with that?
Judicial Watch helped me with that. Nothing, no reply. And the problem now, Mike, is that
no reply.
No reply yet, not at all. The problem now, as Representative Morgan has pointed out to me, because she's also requesting data, is that with the COVID rules, you can extend the delay, apparently up to 40, 50 days in terms of responding.
Right.
So it's the transparency.
Mike, it sounds like government stonewalling. What do you think?
Yeah, they're stonewalling. Exactly.
Yeah, and then of course the other issue, that we had talked about was the issue of the testing and the cycle threshold, which is our initial Freedom of Information Act request. And I did want to share with you something I had forgotten about. And I've never mentioned it with you guys, but the Rhode Island Hospital infectious disease physician who's head of infection control. So in other words, it's a very important job. I mean, in terms of is the hospital basically maintaining sanitary conditions so that people aren't getting infected, employees aren't getting infected in the hospital. I mean, that's one of their key functions. And he's an academic physician, and he published a review.
What's his name?
Dr. Len Mermel. He published a review back in June. It was published online. It's now available in print. And it was, I won't read you the title, but cycle threshold is or the test is in the title. And one of his conclusions was, as with other emerging viral infections, patients with a high SARS-CoV-2, so a COVID-19 PCR cycle threshold.
So a high threshold means low amount of virus.
Yes. Have not been found to have live virus in their respiratory secretions. And he went on to cite 2 studies, one which showed that occurred at a cycle threshold of 34 or greater, and one where it happened at a cycle threshold of 24 or greater.
All right, so let's parse that. Mike, think about this. So you could be testing positive, and as this doctor corroborates what you've said, that unless you reach a certain threshold within a positive test, you're not going to have it in your respiratory system, and therefore you can't be contagious, right?
Right. So the CDC mandates that these testing platforms run through 40 cycles. And in Dr. Mermel's review of the literature as of June, and there's more literature since then, he was concluding that if it's at a high cycle threshold, so certainly above 30, certainly above 35, that he was just confirming what these studies had shown at that point, that these are not people from whom they culture live virus in their respiratory system.
But yet we're treating everybody as if they're contagious.
Well, what we're doing is we're not the state, and now I've had individuals request this, ACI employees, for example, who were essentially asymptomatic or trivially symptomatic, kept out of work, and they're requesting the cycle thresholds on their individual tests, and it's being denied to them. And they're obviously very frustrated because they have to quarantine and stay out of work.
When they may not be contagious.
Yes, and that's the whole point. And there's now a huge body of literature on this, Mike and Mike, that so on the one hand, what the argument has been, it's a very, I hate to get into the weeds on this, but it has to do, and you probably knows more about this than I do, about business regulations, something called an emergency use application. When these testing platforms, the companies that make these tests, these so-called PCR tests, they got their emergency use approval on the basis that they would just report positive or negative. Now, the fact that they're told to set it to 40 cycles is a decision. Well, why not set it at 30 cycles? Why not, as in India, essentially, set it at 25 cycles? Right. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, on top of which, most of the platforms that are doing heavy volume testing know exactly when the test turns positive, whether it turned positive at 10 or 20 or 25 or 30.
And that data is being collected by the labs?
That data is being collected by the labs, but it's only being used for research at this point, guys, so in other words, imagine the frustration of a patient or a physician who's told when he calls a testing lab where he knows they're using one of these platforms and says, well, I want to know, I can use this information clinically. Oh no, we can't give it out. And yet, for example, there's a huge testing center which does 108 universities and colleges in New England based out of MIT, Harvard, called the Broad Institute. They have a contract for 108 colleges and universities in the Northeast, including URI, including UConn. And they've published data from 34,000 Massachusetts nursing home residents and staff using the same platform that they test on the kids. And they've published, very detailed data about the cycle thresholds, including the fact that because it is a reasonable surrogate for the actual amount of virus in samples, they found that if they looked at that entire 34,000 population, 99.99% of the total amount of virus in that population was captured in the cycle thresholds up to and including 26. So in other words, beyond 26, they're only capturing 0.01% of the
That means
total
that means
amount.
that means you could test positive and have virtually no virus.
Right. And now what the apologists for
false
not
positive.
giving out information, or whatever, however you want to call them, the obstructionists will say, well, but you can't make that assumption on every individual test. Well, frankly, that's true of any laboratory test. You can't say any given test in any person out of a million tests is absolutely going to tell you, for example, that this person has a cholesterol of 300 as opposed to 250, because you can test them a few days later and maybe it will be 250. But that begs the whole question. Major decisions are being made about quarantine, about diagnosis. Getting back to diagnoses, you can test positive at whatever cycle threshold it is, be totally asymptomatic, and be classified as having coronavirus as an admission code. And so you're being labeled by the test. Why can't you know what the actual value is? It makes no sense.
Well, it makes a lot of sense if you want to.
Obstruction. It
Makes a lot of sense if you want to keep spreading fear and you're a government official, to make every case seem like
but it's
a deadly
worse than that.
Ebola.
It's worse than that, guys, because
It is worse than that.
they could be using, if there was an open and rational approach, as there is in India, for example. What they do in India, because they have limited resources and 1.4 billion people, they have decided that if you're 50 years of age and your COVID-19 PCR test positive at a cycle threshold of less than 20, if you're 50 and over and have a comorbidity, they actually want to bring you in for observation. Between 20 and 25, if you test positive, again, unless you're like fulminantly ill, they're willing to just have you in contact with the equivalent of, say, a nurse practitioner and monitor you at home. And they don't even deal with people above 25. And now they have limited resources, et cetera. On top of that, they encourage the public to ask for their value individually.
Yeah. So the
They
point is,
encourage
it matters. It matters to know how much virus you have, right? That's the bottom.
And at this point, short of culturing everybody, which can take weeks and is ridiculous, this is a reasonable surrogate for doing that.
So,
All right.
so Andy, asymptomatic, 32 cycle threshold. You got nothing, right? So you test positive, but realistically, is it a false positive? Because really, it's above 32. You're not contagious, right? You're not developing anything in your lungs. And then 2 or 3 days later on, you do a retest and you got nothing.
Right. Well,
Right?
potentially, but
Potentially.
so the thing is, and if you want to make it more stringent, so that you're, for those that are going to perseverate over, there's another problem, is that clinically what we know, forget about testing, is that there's a period, particularly where people are symptomatic even and sick, that beyond 10 days of being like that, you're no longer infectious. You're certainly not infectious if you have 7 to 10 days of observation and you're asymptomatic without testing. This has been shown independently. What the cycle threshold does to help you is it says, okay, the kid's a healthy college kid at URI. They have a cycle threshold, quote unquote, positive above 35. If you want to be more, stringent about it, it's like, leave them alone. I mean, what are you doing to them?
So for clarification purposes, and I understand, but just so that people watching this understand, no one would ever start off with a cycle count of 35. Would they?
Yeah.
If they could start off, but okay. So taking that one step further, if their cycle count is 35 is never going to go to 22. 35 is going to go to higher and go away.
Well, again, I don't think there's enough data to say that. I don't think there's enough data to say that, there are people who are what they call pre-symptomatic, who are particularly in nursing homes, this has been found, who are about to explode. And yet they don't have symptoms. Now, chances are, if you tested them, they probably would be carrying a lot of virus. but it's not as nuanced and granular as that. What I'm saying though is that you've got the benefit now, if you want to call it a benefit, you've got these thousands and thousands of tests. I reviewed data just on campuses. I picked 100 universities where they had good COVID reporting dashboards, and I calculated 139,000 positive tests. And to the best of my ability, at 100 major colleges across this country, to the best of my ability, I could only find reports, because you're dealing with confidentiality issues, of 17 hospitalizations out of those 139,000 positive tests among college kids, and one death, which was reported in the press, but which had no medical validation. So, and this is the scope of what's going on. And it would be helpful for the student health services. And I tried to convince one where my kids go, and I tried to convince them, look, it's a question of, you could use this for research, but it's also may help you.
Yeah, it has practical
Yes.
implications.
The kid that's testing positive and is asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, but has a cycle threshold of 20 or less, keep an eye on that kid.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Ball. So I want to do, Dr. Ball, I want to thank you. I want to spend some time with Mike thinking through some of the implications of this. But once again, you've given us amazing information for us to consider. I want to talk about the public policy implications.
Yeah, and I just
Mike
want to
for a
make
few minutes.
one last comment is that
Okay.
I don't think we got to get the ball rolling for the public.
Yes.
Right? They're entitled, like any other laboratory test, they're entitled to their cycle threshold
Yes.
for their test.
It's their
or
medical
family
data.
member's
Yes.
test. And
Yes.
they just, people spend more time arguing about $15 on a phone bill and working their way up the supervisor, that old routine that my parents taught me. Do the same thing with this
All right.
test.
We're going to talk about that next. Dr. Boston, thank you.
Take
Thank
it.
Yeah,
We'll
but
see you next week.
See you next week, Andy. Thank you.
So Mike, don't you agree? This is your personal medical data. Shouldn't you have access to it?
The silencing of this information is incredible. Here is a highly qualified epidemiologist, and yet we got that Neanderthal sitting outside the State House from the Department of Health, just thrown up there and spewing numbers and telling us about virals and vampire viruses that at 10 o'clock at night you can't go out. When here's the hardcore facts that if we do the correct analysis and test people and give people the numbers and classify them correctly and quantify the numbers in a correct manner, we wouldn't be going through these drastic amount of shutdowns and everything we got going on here.
Bingo. So if we knew, I don't know, have any idea what the data might show, but wouldn't it be possible that if we had this data and we found out that maybe, just like he used those college numbers, and we found out that 80% of the positive tests in Rhode Island showed such insignificant levels of virus that you're not contagious, wouldn't you think that would have some impact on lockdowns and public policy?
Listen, when you want to scare the sheeple, right, you give them high numbers, right?
That's right.
So when you tell everybody we got 1,000 people a day testing positive, everybody's, oh my God, I better go hide under the couch.
That's right.
All right. So they don't want you to know. They do not want you to know that you could be asymptomatic and not spread it to anyone.
But they're justifying everything on data, Mike.
Yeah, well, they're out. Don't forget, they have your well-being at hand. They got nothing in your hand. They want your tax dollars. It's pretty interesting. So let's take what Andy said for a minute, and so people understand the threshold. So you can test positive. You can be a 1 and be highly contagious, because the lower the number, the more dangerous you are to yourself and other people. Or you can test positive and be a 32 and basically have a sniffle. That
Right.
you're probably
Or
taking,
nothing.
or nothing, but the odds are you're probably taking Zicam and don't even know you have corona. Right? We agree with that. But when you go through one of these test sites, you get classified in the same group of everybody 1 through 10.
As the 1.
Right. So when
Now,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. So now you're grouping, you're not breaking out groups. You're putting everybody in the same group for the purpose of what? to paint this
Right.
picture of how bad things are, when realistically, we sound very, very hypocritical to the outside people. People question Andy because they're skeptical, because the news has led them to believe that they're all right up at the State House and we're the crazy ones.
So we just talked about public policy, if we knew we don't need obviously the individual case, but if we knew X% were basically insignificant levels. In fact, let me even say this to those naysayers out there, even Dr. Fauci in June, we have the recording, we'll play it at a future date, said that, over 30, over 35, it's really nothing but a bunch of dead cells in your nose that it's picking up, right? So there is widespread. He even mentioned the doctor at Rhode Island Hospital who published a paper saying the same thing. So Dr. Boston has been substantiated, and there was a national news story on this the other day. We were the first. I think we were the first to break it, probably in the country, and now it's starting to become national news. But let's break it down to an individual level now. He mentioned a friend of his who's an ACI guard.
Yep.
Who tested positive.
Yep. Oh, it
And
went
now
for
he has to
maximum.
miss work for 2 weeks and he won't get paid for it.
Well, that's not true. Okay, let's stop.
All right.
right
Well, all right. Well, maybe he doesn't get paid, but anyway, he has to miss work for 2 weeks.
All right, he does get paid for it because the
Okay.
government makes.
Well, he still has to miss. Other people who miss work in other industries wouldn't get paid, right? Hourly people in other industries.
No.
Right?
Let's stop this because we're not
If
going
you're an
to.
hourly worker at McDonald's, you can't work for 2 weeks.
Yes, let me explain something to you. Okay, and people need to understand this. There was a provision put in when COVID first came in, irrelevant of the extra $600 that went by the wayside. There is a provision in all our payroll companies and all our payroll services that if in fact you, Mike Stenhouse, will work for me, whether you're an hourly employee or a salary, and yes, in fact, you did test positive for COVID and you are medically required to take 2 weeks out of work, I in return pay you. And when I pay you, I use the COVID button on my payroll and the government reimburses me my money back right off the bat. So it does behoove us to pay you to stay out. Okay.
All
And
right,
it doesn't matter whether you're at Mickey
Right,
D's.
but I'm still not saying the point I'm trying to make. I'm talking about individual freedom. So whether you get paid or not, let's think of a student then who has to be quarantined in their room for 2 weeks, okay? Who may not even be contagious. That's my point.
That's a different point.
Think of somebody who tests positive, is treated as if they have Ebola. They're shut away. They can't work. They can't get out of their room. They can't go leave their dorm. And as we've just learned, they may have such an insignificant level of the virus that they're no threat to anybody.
Well, on a
I'm
personal
talking about
basis,
individual freedom here. So not only do we have mass public policy at stake, but we have individual liberty at stake, right?
listen, our rights have all been restricted through this, and you're
Right.
right. An absolute
Right.
test positive constricts you down to 14 days. My nephew right now is sitting on a ship in Guam because of a false positive. Okay, 35 people sitting on a ship in Guam, a Navy oiler with no cook or nothing, and they're bringing food into them by the boxes. All right, because of a false positive test. But because of the close quarters on the ship, they can't take the chance. So they got everybody on a 2-week quarantine. Then when he gets off the boat, he's going to go to a hotel room for 2 weeks.
So you can see the paralyzing effect, whether it's economic or personal freedom. or whatever.
Economic. There's commerce that we
Yep.
just shut down the 6th fleet of fuel.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, because of this.
All right, last question for you. We're running, we had a good long show. Last question. Do you think, per Dr. Boston's suggestion, and I talked to him offline about this morning, we should start some kind of initiative, a petition drive or something, for people to start demanding, that
Absolutely.
the government release the data
Cycle
on
count.
mass and allow individuals to know their level of
Look,
infection.
It's your test. You're going for it, regardless
That's
that. You have the right to know. If you go get a diabetes or a cancer test, you have a right to know what type of cancer. Why wouldn't you get your cycle count or your RNA
Yeah,
number?
that's right.
I don't understand this.
Think it's a good idea to start a little
Well, we're
petition
gonna do-
drive on that?
We got to do something because we got to get this information out to people. They're preying on people's fear. They're guiding people on fear and weakness.
And it may not
will-
even be justified.
So listen, real quick. I went out last night, me and my brother, and it was sorrowful. It was sorrowful. I spoke to Larry last night. He went out and it was the same thing. I went out to a little place I go on Wednesday nights. Me and my brother go, and we go for wings. And I told you that. We go to,
Yep.
the first thing we walk through the door is, do you live together? Okay. Now, like that's relevant towards anything.
This is
What if
the proprietor asking you this?
Right. Okay. What if we drove down in the same car? What difference does it make? Okay. My point in case being is, in this restaurant we were in last night, me and my brother were in one side of the restaurant, and there was 2 or 3 people on the other side of the restaurant. I get to talking to the waitresses, and I have a point behind my whole conversation here. These girls are working in there for $3.25 an hour and relying on tips.
And there's nobody there to tip.
And there's no one there to tip. So as a business owner, and I'm just telling people, if you go out and you do, and I know it's tough for people, but please
Be generous if you can, right?
Be generous if you can, please. It's just, it's just awful what's going on. And now, with even these more restrictions coming down on the shutdowns, this is insane. So if I may, I want to hit on something for a second.
All right, we'll finish the show with that. Go ahead.
Yep. And this is out of the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
And as you know, I keep all my little books right here, and I have them all.
In the Sabrin Tavern.
In the Sabrin Tavern. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature's gods entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they are all endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm only going to read another paragraph. That to secure the rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of the ends, it is the right of the people to alter, to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organization its powers in such form to them shall seem likely to affect safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate the government's long-established thing. All
Well,
right.
it seems like the first half of that paragraph is not happening,
No, it's not happening. Okay.
and neither is the second half.
And nor is the second half. And that's why I only wanted to go so far. So, this was written. It was given to Continental Congress. The only person that signed it really was John Hancock. Okay. And we're pretty interested. It was given to George Washington, on a copy of it on July 9th in 1776. But my point is 1776, 2020, our forefathers had the foresight to know what type of crap these elected people were going to pull.
It still applies today, doesn't it?
And it still applies. And I make a statement all the time, and there's a lot of truth, Mike, and you can appreciate this as a ex-professional ball player. The game doesn't change, just the players do. Right? And with that note, people, start affecting change.
All right, we'll launch that little movement drive. So for In the Dugout and Mike's with Mike's, I am Mike Stenhouse, and
Mike Collins.
wishing you a good day. We will see you next episode on In the Dugout, Mike's with Mike's version. Take care, Mike. Be good.